4 o'clock, stay with the bombers.
One bomber, that's 10 men. We count our victories by the bombers we get to their targets. By the husbands we return to their wives. By the fathers we get back to their children.
Come on, Junior, fail!
The movie's called Red Tails, about America's black fighter pilots of World War II. They fought on 2 fronts, against Nazis in the sky and Uncle Sam on the ground. Today we'll hear from the proud son of a Tuskegee Airman. Hi, I'm Kevin Coughlin for MorristownGreen.com. Thanks for tuning in. MorristownGreen.com. Roland Brown Jr. is a Morristown dentist and a retired Army captain. His late father, Roland Brown Sr., was a Morristown High School graduate who trained as a navigator bombardier with the Tuskegee Airmen, a highly decorated unit of African-American aviators in the segregated Army of the Second World War. We spoke with Doc Brown after a special screening of Red Tails. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So I had the pleasure of meeting you last week when the folks from Sigma Delta Theta had a screening in Morristown of Red Tails. It's a new movie produced by George Lucas about the Tuskegee Airmen. So let's start with that. How realistic was Red Tails?
It was classic Hollywood. They had some firm points that they did bring out, and they added some flourishes here or there. But I think in all, for individuals, the audience that did not know the subject, it was an excellent presentation.
What did they get right, and what maybe did they not get right?
I think that there was a bit of casualness that you saw demonstrated between ranks. It was much more military than that. The whole focus of the Tuskegee Airmen was discipline. It was why they were successful.
Now, for those unfamiliar with the story, tell us a little bit about how the Tuskegee Airmen came to be.
Generally, it happens in every war. The minority population desires to play a role, preferably a significant role. You saw it with glory in the Civil War. You know the story of the 369th Harlem Hellfighters in World War I. And this is just the minority group asking to join up. In this case, the focus was the black press that got the ball rolling. And I think William Randolph, head of the Railroad Workers Union, I'm not sure exactly what his position was, but he was significant in supporting a move to get black flyers aloft, as you might say.
And to make the cut, it was quite exclusive to make that cut, right?
It became more and more exclusive because they had more and more testing. They had a significant amount of testing. The intention was to prove those that wanted it to happen wrong. And they were really challenged both mentally and physically. And the result was they created a group of individuals that were far superior than the average military candidate.
Now, your father flew with the bomber section of the Airmen, correct?
You might look at that as being toward the end of the Tuskegee experience. The younger fellows were incorporated in B-25 medium bombers. They started developing bomber crews there. And all that goes with it. That became logistically much more demanding than the single-seat fighters.
Now, he never quite saw combat, right? The bombers didn't quite... The war ended before they could actually come into play, correct?
From what I understand, they were destined for the Pacific. They did. They finished their basic training after the European effort had concluded, and they were supposed to go to the Pacific. What has been told to me was that the Navy, Nimitz or Halsey, did not want to participate in any program of integration at that point, and that stopped that. Now, as opposed to being in combat, they did have bump heads here in the States with racism, and they look upon that as the role they played, and many significant individuals familiar with it support that.
Our guest on MorristownGreen.com is Roland Brown Jr., remembering his father's days as an African-American aviator in World War II. Up next, a close call and a mutiny. So what attracted your father to the Air Service?
Oh, that was classic. He was raised in Morristown in this liberal society, which he always spoke highly of, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, hearing the stories over the years. But when he entered the military, he was faced with something he really hadn't much experience with, and that was segregation imposed on him. And he was put in a minority, a black labor battalion that was building runways in Florida in 100-degree heat. And he was not comfortable doing that.
This is a man who went on to become an engineer, studied at Lafayette College.
Exactly. Electrical engineer, graduated in 49 from Lafayette College. And so he said he was burning up in this Florida heat, laying asphalt. And someone approached him and said that they were looking for minority candidates for flight school across the base. And he went over, applied, and thank goodness for Morristown education, he passed the test and was accepted.
He's a Morristown High School graduate.
Exactly.
As are you, correct?
No, I was raised down the Jersey Shore.
Oh, okay. But the education he received here helped him make the cut.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And that was history.
So now, would he talk much about his days as an airman?
When I was younger, I remember us singing Air Force songs. He thoroughly enjoyed it. He did stay in and retired as a major. He was in the Air Force Reserves for over 20 years and retired as a major. He enjoyed the Air Force. I think one of the significant points about the Air Force is it was the first service to integrate, and when Truman passed the order.
Your father, was he a bombardier?
Bombardier navigator.
Okay.
In B-25s. That's your medium Mitchell bomber.
And did he continue to fly in his reserve days as well?
No, he was more administrative in his reserve days. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I ended up in the Army as a ground pounder was because he told me it's good to join the service, but don't fly. It's too dangerous.
Did he have any hairy stories from his training days flying?
They did lose bombers in training. The story that there are two significant points that he made. One was they were given passes to leave a base, and the guards were not informed that there was going to be a busload of minority cadets coming through, and one of the guards got on and stopped the bus, got on the bus with a loaded Tommy gun, and was pointed at them with no small anxiety, and that scared everybody. And then they resolved the issue, and the bus was allowed to continue. That probably was the most significant event with regard to life and limb.
So the enemy was Uncle Sam.
Exactly. For the bomber pilots, they had the experience of the Freeman Field mutiny.
Oh, so how did that come down?
They were, I believe it's Indiana, and the cadets were sent up there for advanced training. They've been assembled now as crews, and they were on this base. The base commander, and I will give you these names. I have that information. I believe his name was Selway, was a staunch racist and believed in segregation, and would not allow the cadets to enter the base officers club, even though they were officers at this point. And as a result, he created a problem that really was illegal, because at that point, military bases were supposed to be desegregated. And on this specific occasion, some of the cadets went into the officers club, and the next evening more did, and they were finally put under house arrest. They were rounded up and sent to Godman Field, which is Fort Knox, Kentucky, and everything was kind of thrashed out at that point. The challenge to this racist policy, it ended up going to a court of inquiry, and the justification for the separation by the commanding officer was that cadets were supposed to go to one officers club, while administrative and support personnel officers would use the base officers club, the original officers club. And the challenge came down to a fine point, that with the cadets was a minority medical officer who by rights should have been able to go to the officers club. And when this was brought up in court, the question was asked, why was he not allowed in the officers club? And the second question was, were you trying to teach a doctor to fly?
You're listening to MorristownGreen.com. In our next segment, Roland Brown Jr. cites a fuel tank caper and a disciplinarian as vital pieces of the Tuskegee legend. You know, it's interesting watching the movie last Friday night, this special screening that was held in Morristown, gave me a unique perspective, in a small way, about what these aviators must have faced. It's sort of I was one of the few white people with a large audience of African Americans. All the bad guys in the movie are white guys. All the good guys are the black guys. And I'm sitting there cheering with all the African Americans around me every time the African Americans shoot down a white guy.
But not all of them. If you remember, the bomber crews were positive individuals.
True. It's true. All right.
I think that one of the subtle points here is the fact that when Colonel Davis returned with the fighter pilots to the United States, and now they had a black bomber group, they had a black fighter group, they put them together, and they created the 477 Composite Group, which they were all there in Kentucky at Godman Field together. And from what I have come to understand is Colonel Davis was not supportive of any type of mutiny, regardless of the issue, in terms of service and support. So it's that same attitude that he demonstrated in Italy, meaning that you are going to defend the bombers, you are going to stay with the bombers. There is no question about that.
Because we should note that the unit that saw service in World War II was a fighter group, and they supported bombers making runs over Europe, protecting them from Nazi fighter planes.
The unit that it was involved in active combat, yes, was the fighter group, fighter squadrons.
And they dramatically reduced, the numbers of American bombers getting through dramatically increased with their protection.
They were very successful. At one point, the thought was that they had never lost a bomber, but their own historians have proved that in all they lost around 25 bombers while they were escorting them.
Well, they were human. They weren't superhuman.
Yeah, exactly.
But they did lose something on the order of 66 or...
Of their own, yes.
Their own, right?
I think the number is 66. You're exactly right.
Right, and they were highly decorated.
Highly decorated unit.
Right.
The movie does show the mission in which they received the Presidential Unit Citation. And that was where they were responsible for escorting the bombers to a certain turnover point and then allow them to go forward with another fighter unit to Berlin. And when they got to the turnover point, the other unit was not there. So the decision was they would go all the way. It turned out being the longest fighter escort mission of the war. I believe during that mission they shot down 3 Me-262s, the first German jets in combat, and again won the Presidential Unit Citation for the effort. One of the footnotes that I learned as vice president of the Philly chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen Association was that the fuel tanks that they needed for that mission were not available to them and their new P-51 Mustang fighters, and they found a depot that had the tanks, and they sent their men over there as a let's say a undeclared labor battalion, and requisitioned the tanks for the other unit and brought them back and used them themselves.
These were tanks that enabled them to fly longer distances?
Exactly, long distance. Yeah.
You mentioned the name Colonel Davis, Benjamin O. Davis. He's a very large figure in this whole story.
He's the reason they were successful. Back in the early 30s, his father, who was an ROTC instructor at Tuskegee Institute, was in that position so long, coming up through the ranks, that he made general. By the book, he became the first minority general in the United States Army. And the Army decided that they really shouldn't have a general teaching ROTC, so they brought him up to Washington and created his own section, and that was a section that dealt with the Negro soldier in the Army, and he would tour the country evaluating that subject. But his son, being the son of a general, had the door open at West Point for him. So he attended West Point, graduating, I believe, in 36, and he was silenced his entire 4 years. He was not spoken to socially at all. The only time anyone communicated with him was in an official manner, either in class or on a field study. And that was an entire 4 years. He roomed by himself. The only time he really got in trouble is they found a radio in his room. He used to keep himself company with that. But he graduated from the academy successfully, being the first minority to do it in the 20th century. When he graduated, there were only 2 Negro officers in the Army, and that was he and his father. His father is general. He is a brand new second lieutenant. Whatever seeds this may have sown with respect to discipline, they were successful because he was determined to be successful with the Army Air Corps, and he was in the first class to successfully graduate as flying candidates, and with that, he got the ball rolling and became their commanding officer and demonstrated to everyone, and pretty much to a man, they agree that it was this discipline that he learned and instilled in them that was responsible for them being successful.
So was he teaching them basically to turn the other cheek, or to let the bigotry roll off their backs, basically, and just keep their nose to the grindstone?
Follow orders. Mm-hmm. Follow orders. That the mission was primary. You see this in the role they played. This movie shows this quite nicely. The fact is that, and you have to realize that if you're a minority pilot, you're not going to fly anywhere else in the world for no other country. Maybe for England, maybe for Canada at that point, when you look at the equipment that was available. But the chances of flying the brand new P-51s lay with the United States Air Force or Army Air Corps at that point. So if you did not follow orders, you were not flying. And that's what these young men wanted to do. They wanted to fly, and they wanted to fight.
This is MorristownGreen.com. Our guest, Roland Brown Jr., will tell us about a very special reunion in our next segment. After the war, were there any opportunities for commercial aviation for the black pilots?
Very little. I think the story that stands out the most was the story of Roscoe Brown, namesake, no relation, who went on to become president of Manhattan City College. He was on the Berlin mission, and he was one of the individuals that shot down a jet, the 262. When he returned, he was taking an examination for a job position with a corporation, and that particular day he had picked up a newspaper. He didn't know how long he'd have to wait, and he took the exam. But when he left the examination room, he had left his newspaper under his chair. And when he went back to retrieve it, he saw them putting his test in a wastebasket. And this confused him, and he challenged them. And they said, there's no position for a minority here, so there's no need to even grade your exam.
Was your father bitter about the things he experienced when he was training?
Not really. I wouldn't say bitter. I'd say he was happy to be alive each time they touched down. And for him, he came out of the service, joined my grandfather up at Shawnee on the Delaware, and while he was at Shawnee, he was a golfer. As I may have told you, my grandfather was a golf professional, the first minority to hold a PGA card. And thanks to Fred Waring and others at Shawnee, he was successful as assistant pro there. And he put my father in charge of the caddy shack. And he did quite well in those days, those post-war days. And while he was there, he was a good golfer himself. And a gentleman who had gone to Lafayette saw him hitting a golf ball and suggested that he go down to Lafayette because they could use him on the golf team. And he did, and was enrolled in Lafayette.
So before there was Tiger Woods, there was your dad.
Oh, he'd like to think so. He graduated in '49, the first minority of this century, or the 20th century, to graduate from Lafayette. And eventually he was invited to be a trustee at Lafayette, and so he wasn't bitter. As I told you before, he stayed in the Air Force, as many of them did, and it proved to be a good road for them. Because in 1948, Truman integrated the services, and as we have previously said, the Air Force was the first service to integrate.
When you were contemplating entering the service yourself, so your dad told you safer on the ground, did he give you any other advice about how to navigate your way through the military?
He did soften that stance when he saw I had a chance to fly helicopters, but I kind of backed off of that. No, follow orders. To answer your question, follow orders, and the mission is primary and paramount.
And a few years ago, I believe you had the chance to be involved with a very special reunion of the Tuskegee Airmen. Tell me about that.
In my role as vice president of their chapter, of this alumni chapter of theirs in Philadelphia, I helped organize their 60th reunion. And they had it up at Reading Airport during their traditional Normandy weekend, the first weekend of June. And we arranged to fly one of the original Tuskegee Airmen in his original equipment, which would be the B-25 bomber, the one that they have there in Reading. And Bertram Levy, who was a major, flew with my father, same squadron, from Philly, was selected as the Tuskegee Airman who could make the climb up into the fuselage and flight. And he was tickled to death. It was fabulous to see him do this. He was like a kid again. He loved the B-25, he told me. And then they tapped me on the shoulder and said, we want you to fly too in your father's old position. So that was very moving. And I flew as in the Bombardier Navigator position, which is the nose. And what I didn't know is when you take off and land, the Bombardier Navigator and nose gunner, that's also a responsibility, sits behind and below the pilot and co-pilot in this well. And when you're airborne, they give you the signal, and you crawl through a 10-foot aluminum chute up into the bird cage of a nose where you're all by yourself as they then go into combat maneuvers. It was exciting. It was exciting. And but it's different being a 20-year-old flight candidate and a dentist from Morristown crawling through that chute.
So you're just hanging out there basically in this turret?
You're in it's a birdcage nose of the plane, and you have the best seat in the house. You're the first one to see anything. And
you load up on Dramamine for that one?
I thought about it, but no, I didn't. I wanted the full experience. And we came around at a steep bank, and out there in Reading, there's evidently an Oriental restaurant or something, but a pagoda structure up on a ridge. And we went straight toward it, and you felt like the Tokyo Raider doing that. And he went pretty close to that. But it was a great experience and something I really had wanted to do my whole life. Never thought I'd pull it off, and that was fun.
You're listening to MorristownGreen.com. In our final segment, Roland Brown Jr. recounts his father's World War II mission over New Jersey and reflects on the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. What was that plane like?
The B-25? It's a twin-engine medium bomber.
How big a crew?
You have a Bombardier Navigator, nose gunner, that's one. Pilot, co-pilot. You have a top turret, probably a radio man, and you also had a tail gunner. So 5, possibly 6. And it was a medium bomber that was very stable to fly, unlike the B-26 Marauder. And it was a great bomber for cadets to train in.
Could that take off of an aircraft carrier?
They did for the Tokyo raid, but it was not designed, and that was significant about that whole mission. The B-25 was not designed for carrier operations. And that was what was so fabulous, is the way they committed themselves to use it that way.
What did your father tell you about the airplanes? I'm sure when you were growing up, he must have told you stories about what it was like to be in that airplane. Was he fond of the aircraft?
They all believed in the B-25. This is the bomber group.
Right.
Now the fighter
Right.
group, they believed in the P-51 Mustang, but the bomber group, they believed in that plane. They loved that plane because it always brought them home safely.
Did they paint the tails red on those as well?
No. Those were the idea of painting the tails red came from the fact that when these minority pilots got to Africa, they got used P-40s, they got used P-39 Air Cobras, they got used P-47 Thunderbolts.
High mileage.
Yeah, exactly. I believe I was told while I was in Philly that the P-40s actually were some of the Flying Tiger P-40s. That when they decommissioned that effort and had the Air Force take over responsibilities for Burma, China, that these were some of the planes that were returned via the Mideast to North Africa and used by the Tuskegee Airmen in their initial combat forays. And that was the P-40s. Well, they found with so many different planes coming from so many different avenues, the easiest thing to do is to paint the tail red. Easy to identify the plane. So that was one of the reasons they did that. Now, the bombers, that was, first of all, stateside, and they did not do that. I believe the cowling on the engines were painted yellow, and that was to indicate training. The training.
I was watching those World War II movies. I always wondered when the big bombers were flying in formation, with all those machine guns they had, how they avoided shooting each other to pieces as those turrets are swinging around. Was that a problem? Did they have special rules of engagement to prevent that? Or?
That's all part of training, and I think you see that demonstrated in the film 12 O'Clock High, that you had a position in the formation and a responsibility to the entire unit, that your 10 guns meant something to the entire formation. To be out there on your own was very dangerous.
Did your father's training include bailing out of airplanes?
He never did, but training did include bailing out. I can tell you this, being in that nose and trying to get out of that nose through that aluminum chute and out of the bomb bay, a lot of people didn't make it.
Were those planes kind of lumbering, rickety, drafty things, or what was the experience like?
Noisy vibration. He did tell me about one flight he had with Chappie James, and this is as a new navigator bombardier, and it was a flight, not a training flight, it was a resupply flight where they were going to take a B-25 Chappie James, who became the first 4-star general in the Air Force, minority general, was flying from Godman Field in Kentucky over to McGuire Air Force Base to pick up things for the PX. And my father was slated to be his navigator, and he had done a lot of prep for this flight, and got up there and reported to Captain James and started to explain the mission, the route. And Chappie said, "Now, what I want you to do is just relax, assume your position, because we're going to take off. We're going to find the Pennsylvania, we're going to fly up the river, the Ohio River, get the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and then we'll come into the Jersey Turnpike, and right there at exit 7 is McGuire." That's pretty much what the flight was like.
Did he pay tolls along the way?
though on the way back, it was his first night flight. It turned out to be his first extended night flight, and he said sitting there watching the fire coming out of these engines was a little bit unnerving.
So how many of the Tuskegee Airmen are still alive?
I'd say last year they were saying maybe 100 of the pilots and less or less than 100, and then you have maybe less than 500 flight personnel. That includes nurses, dentists, and all the support personnel that were at Tuskegee.
So looking back, what do you think is the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen?
I think you have to look at it along with the legacy of every minority effort in every war, because they're building on what has gone before. And that's a lesson we seem to have to keep coming back to. To answer your question specifically, it showed that the minority was just as capable of handling and being successful with modern technology. They proved that over Anzio. When the United States Army got in a difficult position at Anzio and the Germans were bombing the beachhead, that's when they really were committed. That's when the Tuskegee Airmen were committed to defend the beachhead. And I believe 7 or 8 air groups were assigned to the beachhead, and the Tuskegee personnel were the most successful, shooting down 11 on one day and 13 overall. They had the highest kill ratio. You might say another point to make is after combat, after the war was over, the Air Force decided to hold gunnery meets to keep every unit proficient. And your fighter units from around the world would send elements to the States for what would become the William Tell competition. And that's, I believe, what they call it now, the William Tell competition, in which it is a gunnery meet to find out who is the best in ground targets, aerial targets, moving targets, what have you. And the first year, they did it, I believe it was 47, and Tuskegee Airmen came in first place and proud. They lost the trophy. They lost the trophy for 30 years. They just found it a couple of years ago, first place trophy. They said it was misplaced.
Well, our guest has been Dr. Roland Brown, retired Army captain and a dentist here in Morristown. His father was a member of the Tuskegee Airmen. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, and good luck to you and Morristown on the Green.
And thank you for listening. Our theme song was by Zazu Zaz. We'll leave you now with another clip from the movie Red Tails. For MorristownGreen.com, this is Kevin Coughlin saying, listen up, Morristown.
Bandits! Hundreds of them! 6 o'clock!
It's got German markings.
Let's get them!
Where are the damn fighters going? Is there anything left of our escort? Mayday! Mayday! Prepare to bail out!
Our boys are getting cut to shreds.
I need pilots who will put the bombers ahead of themselves.
When we came under your command, Colonel, you stated very clearly that we would never find Negroes who could pass a pilot's exam, make it through flight school, survive basic combat. We've done all of that.
I don't believe your boys have scored a single aerial kill.
It's damn hard to shoot down the enemy 100 miles behind the front lines.
What we do, how well we do it, does it matter?
And you all thought what?
You'd sign up, and that'd be the end of 100 years of bigotry. Get your head up, son. You're fighter pilots.
We have a right to fight for our country, the same as every other American. We will not go away.
I can't afford the kind of losses my bombers have been suffering. Can you help save lives?
If you get us new planes, we can help your boys.
Nothing's difficult!
Everything's a challenge.
Through adversity! To the stars!
From the last plane, to the last bullet, to the last minute, to the last man
We fight!
We fight!
We fight!
We fight!
We fight!
We fight!